Sometimes the loneliest place during Christmas is not an empty house, but a crowded table with one chair waiting for someone who will never arrive. On the evening of December 23rd, Ethan Walker sat alone in the dining room of his large Victorian home overlooking the snowy hills outside Maple Creek, Vermont. Golden Christmas lights glowed softly around the room. A beautifully decorated tree stood in the corner. Wrapped presents rested beneath its branches. Holiday music drifted quietly from a nearby speaker. Everything looked exactly the way Christmas was supposed to look, yet none of it felt right. Across the long dining table sat 6 empty chairs. One chair belonged to his parents, who were spending the holidays in Florida. Another belonged to his younger brother, now living in Seattle. The remaining chairs represented friends and family who once filled the house with laughter but had gradually built lives elsewhere. Ethan stared at a mug of coffee growing cold between his hands. At 38 years old, he had everything people usually envied. He owned a successful real estate company. He lived in one of the most beautiful homes in town. He could afford almost anything he wanted. Yet as snow drifted beyond the windows and Christmas approached, he felt more alone than ever. 3 months earlier, his engagement ended unexpectedly. The woman he planned to marry decided she wanted a different future. The separation was not dramatic. There were no arguments, no betrayal, just 2 people quietly realizing they wanted different lives. Since then, Ethan had buried himself in work. During the day, that strategy worked well enough. Meetings filled his schedule. Clients occupied his attention. But Christmas had a way of exposing the spaces people usually avoided. Tonight, those spaces felt impossible to ignore. His phone buzzed on the table. A text message from his mother appeared on the screen. "Are you coming to the Christmas Eve gathering tomorrow?" Ethan sighed. The annual town celebration was one of Maple Creek's oldest traditions. Nearly everyone attended. Families gathered around the town square. Children sang carols. Local businesses served hot chocolate and homemade cookies. Normally, he enjoyed it. This year felt different. He stared at the message before typing a simple reply. "I will be there." After sending it, he set the phone aside and walked toward the living room window. Snowflakes drifted lazily beneath streetlights. Maple Creek looked like something from a holiday postcard. Warm storefronts glowed along Main Street. Wreaths hung from nearly every door. The entire town seemed wrapped in comfort and belonging. Everyone except him, or so it felt. The next afternoon, Ethan arrived downtown and immediately found himself surrounded by holiday energy. Children ran through the square. Couples carried shopping bags between decorated storefronts. Friends exchanged greetings beneath strings of white lights hanging overhead. The atmosphere should have lifted his spirits. Instead, it only reminded him how disconnected he felt. As he stood near a coffee stand warming his hands, he overheard a conversation between 2 women nearby. "Did you see her bookstore still has lights on?" one asked. The other laughed softly. "Amara Bennett always keeps them on." Ethan recognized the name. Almost everyone in town did. "I still do not understand why she stays here," the first woman continued. "Nobody talks to her. Maybe she likes being alone. Or maybe people have not forgotten what happened." The women lowered their voices and walked away. Ethan watched them disappear into the crowd. He frowned slightly. He had heard Amara's name before. Everyone had. Yet nobody ever explained exactly why she seemed isolated from the rest of the community. The only thing Ethan knew for certain was that she owned the small bookstore near the end of Main Street, and that most people avoided her. As evening settled over Maple Creek and Christmas lights illuminated the town square, Ethan found himself glancing toward the old bookstore across the street. Warm light glowed through its front window while snow gathered quietly on the roof. For reasons he could not explain, he suddenly felt curious about the woman everyone seemed determined to forget. The following morning, Maple Creek woke beneath a fresh blanket of snow. Overnight, the sidewalks, rooftops, and pine trees had disappeared beneath several inches of white, transforming the town into something that looked almost magical. Store owners brushed snow from their windows. Children dragged sleds toward the small hill behind the church. Christmas Eve had arrived, and with it came the familiar warmth that always seemed to settle over the town, no matter how cold the weather became. Ethan spent most of the morning pretending to work. He sat inside his home office reviewing contracts and answering emails, but his attention wandered repeatedly toward the bookstore across town. The conversation he overheard the previous evening continued lingering in his mind. Everyone knew who Amara Bennett was. Yet nobody ever seemed willing to explain what she had supposedly done. They only spoke in vague warnings and unfinished sentences. Around noon, curiosity finally won. Ethan grabbed his coat, wrapped a scarf around his neck, and drove toward Main Street. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he crossed the sidewalk and approached the bookstore. A small brass bell chimed above the door when he stepped inside. Warm air immediately greeted him. The scent of coffee and old books filled the room. Soft Christmas music played somewhere in the background. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, packed with novels, biographies, and children's stories. A decorated tree stood near the front window with handmade ornaments hanging from its branches. The entire place felt welcoming, peaceful, completely different from the image people seemed to carry of its owner. Ethan moved slowly between the shelves. He noticed several elderly customers browsing comfortably near the back. A young mother sat reading beside her daughter in the children's section. The atmosphere felt less like a business and more like a refuge. Then he saw her. Amara stood behind the counter organizing a stack of books. She wore a simple dark green sweater and a long gray scarf. Her natural curls rested gently on her shoulders. There was nothing dramatic about her appearance. No sign of the mystery the town attached to her name. She simply looked like someone quietly focused on her work. When she noticed him approaching, she offered a polite smile. "Can I help you find something?" Her voice sounded calm and warm. Ethan hesitated for a second. "Actually, I am not sure." Amara smiled slightly. "That usually means you are looking for a good story." The answer surprised him enough to laugh. "Maybe I am." For the next few minutes, she recommended several books based on his interests. The conversation remained easy, natural. Not once did she mention the town. Not once did she seem guarded or defensive. If anything, she appeared remarkably comfortable being herself. Eventually, Ethan carried 2 novels to the counter. As Amara completed the purchase, the front door opened. A woman entered carrying several shopping bags. The moment she noticed Amara, her smile disappeared. She turned immediately and left without saying a word. Ethan watched the exchange. Amara simply continued scanning books as if nothing unusual had happened. Yet he noticed a brief sadness pass through her eyes before it vanished. "Does that happen often?" he asked carefully. Amara looked up. For a moment, silence settled between them. Then she smiled again. Not bitterly, just tired. "More often than you would think." Ethan wanted to ask why. Instead, he nodded. Something told him she had answered enough questions for one day. After leaving the bookstore, he walked slowly back toward his truck. Snowflakes drifted through the afternoon air. Christmas lights sparkled along Main Street. Yet his thoughts remained fixed on one realization. The woman he had just met looked nothing like the person people described. And for the first time, Ethan found himself wondering whether the town's most accepted people might be far less honest than the woman everyone had chosen to reject. Christmas Eve arrived wrapped in silver snow and glowing lights. Throughout Maple Creek, families gathered around dinner tables, children opened early gifts, and church bells echoed softly through the winter air. Yet despite the warmth surrounding the town, Ethan found himself thinking about the quiet bookstore at the end of Main Street. He spent most of the afternoon attending holiday events, shaking hands with neighbors, and exchanging polite conversations he barely remembered afterward. Everywhere he went, people smiled. Everywhere he went, he felt strangely disconnected. By 6 o'clock that evening, the annual Christmas Eve celebration filled the town square. Strings of lights hung above the streets like glowing stars. Local vendors served hot cider and homemade cookies. A choir performed traditional carols beneath a large decorated tree standing at the center of the square. The scene looked beautiful. Yet Ethan noticed something unusual. Nearly everyone attended except one person. Amara Bennett was nowhere to be seen. As the evening continued, curiosity slowly transformed into concern. Eventually, he found himself walking away from the crowd and heading toward her bookstore. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he crossed the street. The familiar golden light still glowed through the front windows. When he opened the door, the brass bell chimed softly overhead. Amara looked up from behind the counter, clearly surprised. "I thought everyone would be at the square," Ethan said. Amara smiled gently. "Most people are." Her answer carried enough meaning that he did not need further explanation. For a moment neither spoke. Christmas music drifted quietly through the store. Outside, Snowflakes continued falling beneath the streetlights. Ethan glanced around the nearly empty room. You stay open on Christmas Eve? Only until 8, she replied. Some people need books more than they need presents. The answer made him smile. Then an unexpected idea entered his mind. Would you like to come to the Christmas tree lighting? Amara blinked. The invitation clearly caught her off guard. Me? Yes. She laughed softly. You are asking the wrong person. Why? Amara looked toward the front window. Beyond the glass, families walked through the snowy streets carrying shopping bags and cups of hot chocolate. Because I am not exactly popular there. Ethan studied her expression carefully. There was no bitterness in her voice. Only acceptance, as though she had grown accustomed to standing outside places where everyone else belonged. Then maybe that is exactly why you should come. For several seconds, Amara remained silent. Finally, she shook her head. I appreciate the invitation. Really, but I think I will stay here. Ethan nodded, though disappointment surprised him. He barely knew her. Yet somehow he found himself wanting her company more than the crowded celebration outside. Before leaving, he glanced toward a small bulletin board hanging near the counter. Dozens of handwritten notes covered its surface. Children's drawings. Thank you cards. Holiday messages. Curious, he stepped closer. Many notes thanked the bookstore for donated books, tutoring sessions, or community programs. Several came from families struggling financially. Ethan read them one by one. The deeper he looked, the more confused he became. The woman everyone avoided appeared to spend much of her time helping others. You never mentioned any of this, he said quietly. Amara followed his gaze. It is not something people need to hear about. Ethan looked back at the notes. The kindness displayed there felt genuine. Quiet. Unadvertised. The opposite of the person the town described. As he prepared to leave, another thought occurred to him. Tomorrow there is a holiday brunch at my house. Amara immediately shook her head. No, you did not even let me finish. I know where that invitation leads. Ethan laughed. Where? Awkward conversations, and people wondering why I am there. He could not argue with her logic. Yet something inside him refused to let the conversation end. Standing there beneath the warm glow of bookstore lights while snow fell gently outside, Ethan realized he was no longer interested in the rumors surrounding Amara Bennett. He was interested in the woman herself. And for the first time since his engagement ended, he felt something unexpected begin replacing loneliness. Curiosity. Christmas morning arrived quietly in Maple Creek. Fresh snow covered the streets like a soft white blanket, reflecting the pale sunlight that filtered through low winter clouds. Most families spent the day indoors opening gifts, sharing meals, and creating memories. Ethan tried doing the same. He attended brunch at his parents' house despite their absence, hosted a few relatives passing through town, and smiled through conversations that felt increasingly distant. Yet throughout the day, his thoughts repeatedly drifted toward the bookstore and the woman who had chosen solitude over another uncomfortable holiday gathering. By late afternoon, unable to ignore the feeling any longer, Ethan bundled himself in a heavy coat and headed downtown. Main Street looked nearly deserted. Most shops were closed. Christmas wreaths swayed gently beneath storefront signs. Snowflakes occasionally drifted through the air despite the calm weather. When he reached the bookstore, he noticed lights glowing behind the front windows once again. The familiar warmth greeted him as soon as he stepped inside. The brass bell chimed overhead. Amara looked up from a ladder near one of the bookshelves where she was rearranging holiday displays. Genuine surprise crossed her face. You came back. Ethan smiled. I was starting to think this place never closes. Amara laughed softly. Books do not take holidays. The sound of her laughter lingered longer than he expected. Over the next hour, they talked more than they had during all previous encounters combined. At first, the conversation remained simple. Favorite authors, childhood memories, Christmas traditions. But gradually the subjects became more personal. Ethan spoke about his failed engagement, about the quiet house that suddenly felt too large, about how loneliness seemed louder during the holidays than any other time of year. Amara listened carefully without offering easy advice. When he finished speaking, she simply nodded. People think loneliness only happens when you are physically alone, she said. That is not true. Ethan looked at her curiously. What do you mean? She smiled faintly while adjusting a stack of novels. Some of the loneliest people I have ever met were surrounded by others. The answer stayed with him, because it felt true. As the afternoon continued, A few customers entered the store. What Ethan noticed surprised him. Despite the rumors surrounding Amara, every interaction revealed extraordinary kindness. She helped an elderly man locate a book his late wife used to read every Christmas. She quietly slipped a discounted novel into a young student's bag when she realized the girl could not afford it. She recommended books with patience and enthusiasm that never felt forced. Most importantly, she treated everyone with respect regardless of how they treated her. Watching her work felt like witnessing a version of reality the town refused to acknowledge. Later, as sunset painted the snow outside in shades of gold and pink, an elderly woman entered carrying several grocery bags. Ethan immediately recognized her. Mrs. Caldwell lived alone on the edge of town. Before he could offer assistance, Amara crossed the room and took the bags from her hands. "How are you feeling today?" she asked warmly. The older woman smiled. "Better now that I see you." The exchange lasted only seconds. Yet something about it caught Ethan's attention. After Mrs. Caldwell left, he turned toward Amara. "You know a lot of people." Amara shrugged. "Small towns are like that. Most people act like they barely know you." For the first time that day, a shadow crossed her expression. Only briefly. Then it disappeared. People believe what they want to believe. Ethan studied her face. He sensed there was more behind those words. Much more. But he also understood she was not ready to explain. As darkness settled outside and Christmas lights illuminated Main Street once again, Ethan found himself realizing something important. The more time he spent with Amara Bennett, the less he trusted the stories people told about her. Because the woman standing before him looked nothing like a person deserving rejection. If anything, she seemed to be one of the kindest people in Maple Creek. The only mystery left was why nobody else wanted to see it. The days after Christmas passed slowly, wrapped in the quiet rhythm of winter. Snow remained piled along sidewalks and rooftops throughout Maple Creek, while strings of holiday lights continued glowing across Main Street even as the season began winding down. For Ethan, a routine had quietly formed without him fully realizing it. Nearly every afternoon, he found a reason to visit the bookstore. Sometimes he purchased a book. Sometimes he brought coffee. Sometimes he simply stopped by because the warmth inside those walls felt more inviting than the silence waiting for him at home. Amara never questioned his visits. She simply welcomed him with the same calm smile each time he entered. One snowy afternoon, Ethan arrived carrying 2 cups of coffee and a box of pastries from a local bakery. The bookstore was nearly empty. Soft music drifted through the room while snowflakes tapped gently against the windows. Amara looked up from a stack of inventory paperwork and smiled. "You know you do not have to keep bringing supplies." Ethan placed the coffee on the counter. "I am beginning to suspect you would survive without me." Amara laughed softly. "I have managed for 34 years. The sound made him smile. Over the next hour, they sat at a small table near the front window, sharing coffee, while watching people move through the snowy streets outside. Their conversations no longer felt cautious. They spoke about childhood memories, favorite places, dreams they once had, and disappointments they rarely discussed with anyone else. Ethan found himself telling stories he had not shared in years. Amara listened the way few people did. She never interrupted, never rushed to respond. She simply paid attention. Somewhere along the way, Ethan realized how rare that had become. Later that afternoon, the bookstore door opened and a young boy stepped inside wearing a worn winter coat. Ethan recognized him immediately. Tyler Morgan. His family had been struggling financially since his father lost his job. The boy walked directly toward Amara carrying a library card. "I finished the book," he announced proudly. Amara smiled. "Already?" Tyler nodded enthusiastically. "Do you have another one?" Without hesitation, she led him toward a shelf near the back of the store and spent several minutes helping him choose a new story. Ethan watched quietly. After the boy left, he noticed something unusual. There had been no charge. "You lend books?" he asked. Amara returned to the counter. "For some kids." "For free." She shrugged. Stories should belong to everyone. The answer lingered in Ethan's mind. During the following week, he noticed similar moments everywhere. Amara quietly delivered groceries to elderly residents. She organized reading programs for children. She donated books to families who could not afford them. Yet she never spoke about these things publicly. In fact, she seemed uncomfortable whenever anyone tried to thank her. One afternoon, Ethan finally asked the question that had been bothering him for days. Why do you keep helping people who treat you poorly? Amara looked out the window before answering. Snow drifted gently across Main Street. Because kindness is not supposed to depend on how people treat you. Ethan remained silent. The simplicity of the answer made it even more powerful. A few days later, they found themselves walking through town after a fresh snowfall. Christmas decorations still hung from many storefronts. Their breath formed small clouds in the cold air. For the first time in months, Ethan realized he was genuinely happy. Not because something extraordinary had happened, because he no longer felt alone. As they passed the town square, several people glanced toward Amara before quickly looking away. Ethan noticed the familiar reaction. So did she. Yet instead of appearing hurt, she simply continued walking. Does it still bother you? He asked quietly. Amara considered the question. Sometimes. She smiled faintly. But not as much as it used to. Ethan looked at her for a moment. The woman everyone avoided possessed more grace than anyone he had ever met. And as snowflakes settled gently around them beneath the soft glow of winter lights, he realized something else. Somewhere between shared coffees, quiet conversations, and snowy afternoons, Amara Bennett had become the part of his day he looked forward to most. January arrived with colder winds and shorter days. The Christmas decorations gradually disappeared from storefronts across Maple Creek, but something else remained. Questions. The more time Ethan spent with Amara, the harder it became to ignore the mystery surrounding her reputation. Every interaction he witnessed contradicted the stories people seemed determined to believe. She was generous where others claimed she was selfish. She was patient where others described her as difficult. She was kind in ways most people never even noticed. Eventually, curiosity gave way to concern. Ethan no longer wanted rumors. He wanted the truth. One snowy afternoon, the answer arrived unexpectedly. Ethan stopped by the bookstore carrying coffee as usual. The shop was quiet except for an elderly woman sitting near the fireplace reading a novel. Amara was helping organize several donation boxes near the back room. As Ethan approached, the elderly woman smiled warmly. You must be Ethan Walker. Surprised, he nodded. I am. The woman closed her book. Then I should probably thank you. Ethan looked confused. For what? She glanced toward Amara before lowering her voice. For being one of the few people willing to sit beside her. The comment immediately captured his attention. Do you know what happened? The woman hesitated. For several seconds, she studied the bookstore window where snow drifted gently outside. Then she sighed. I know what really happened. Most people do not. Ethan sat down across from her. For the next several minutes, he listened carefully. Nearly 8 years earlier, a devastating accident had changed several lives in Maple Creek. During a winter storm, a teenage boy lost control of his vehicle on an icy road. Another young passenger was seriously injured. Rumors spread quickly throughout town. Somehow, people became convinced that Amara had encouraged the teenagers to travel during dangerous weather conditions because she had been helping organize a community event that evening. The story grew larger each year. More dramatic. More distorted. Eventually, many residents blamed her for something she never actually caused. Ethan frowned. That cannot be the whole story. It is not, the woman replied quietly. The truth is much harder. She explained that Amara knew exactly how the accident occurred. She knew because she was protecting someone. The injured passenger had been a close friend who made a serious mistake before the crash. A mistake that would have destroyed his future and devastated his family. Rather than expose him publicly, Amara accepted the blame people directed toward her. She never defended herself. Never corrected the rumors. Never revealed information that would hurt someone she cared about. The friend eventually left town, built a successful life elsewhere, and never returned. Meanwhile, Amara remained, carrying a reputation she did not deserve. Ethan sat speechless. The explanation felt almost impossible to believe. Not be. For years, the truth remained buried beneath assumptions, half-remembered stories, and the comfort people found in believing they already knew what happened. But secrets rarely stay hidden forever. In a town as small as Maple Creek, the past had a way of returning when nobody expected it. The change began on a cold January morning when an unfamiliar vehicle pulled into town and parked near the bookstore. Few people noticed at first. Fewer still recognized the man who stepped out. Time had changed him. He was older now, more confident, more successful. Yet when he stood staring at the bookstore window, there was no mistaking the emotion on his face. Regret. Deep, unmistakable regret. Ethan happened to be inside helping Amara unpack a shipment of books when the door opened. The brass bell chimed softly. Amara looked up and immediately froze. The color drained from her face. For several seconds, neither person moved. Neither spoke. The silence itself seemed to tell a story. Finally, the man stepped forward. Amara. His voice cracked slightly. Ethan watched carefully. He had never seen her look unsettled before. The man introduced himself as Daniel Mercer. Years ago, he had been the young passenger involved in the accident that changed everything. After leaving Maple Creek, he built a successful engineering company in Colorado. Now he had returned carrying something he should have brought back years earlier. The truth. Later that afternoon, word spread quickly throughout town. People gathered at the community center after hearing Daniel requested permission to speak publicly. Curiosity filled every seat. Some arrived expecting drama. Others came searching for answers. Ethan sat near the back beside Amara. She looked uncomfortable being the center of attention. As always, she would have preferred silence. But this story no longer belonged to silence. When Daniel stepped onto the small stage, the room grew still. He looked around slowly before speaking. 8 years ago, someone paid a price that should have been mine. Confused murmurs moved through the audience. Daniel continued. He explained everything. The choices made before the accident. The mistakes he carried. The conversations afterward. Most importantly, he explained how Amara protected him. She never lied. She never accused anyone else. She simply refused to reveal information that would have destroyed his future and deeply hurt his family. While rumors grew around her, she remained silent. While friendships disappeared, she remained silent. While people judged her without knowing the truth, she remained silent. Not because she was guilty, because she chose compassion over self-defense. The room became completely quiet. Some people lowered their eyes. Others stared at Amara in disbelief. Suddenly, years of assumptions began collapsing beneath the weight of reality. Ethan glanced around and saw something remarkable. Many of the same people who avoided her bookstore now looked ashamed. They were not facing a villain. They were facing a woman who had sacrificed her own reputation to protect someone else. Daniel's voice grew emotional as he finished. Every good thing in my life exists because she gave me a second chance I did not deserve. And I spent 8 years letting her carry a burden that belonged to me. When he stepped away from the microphone, nobody spoke immediately. The silence felt different now. Heavy, honest, real. One by one, people began approaching Amara. Some offered apologies. Others simply thanked her. Several struggled to find words at all. Mrs. Caldwell wiped tears from her eyes. Former classmates expressed regret. Store owners who barely acknowledged her for years suddenly seemed unable to look away. Through it all, Amara remained gracious. She accepted every apology with the same calm dignity she carried through every hardship. Later that evening, snow began falling again as people left the community center. Ethan and Amara walked slowly through the town square beneath glowing streetlights. For the first time in years, strangers smiled at her without hesitation. Children waved. Neighbors greeted her warmly. Maple Creek was finally seeing the woman who had been there all along. Ethan looked at her and smiled. How does it feel? Amara watched snowflakes drift through the night sky. Her answer came softly. Honestly, she smiled. Mostly the same. Ethan laughed. Of course she would say that. Because the truth was simple. Amara Bennett had never changed. The town finally had. The weeks following the revelation changed Maple Creek in ways nobody expected. The bookstore became busier than it had been in years. Customers who once crossed the street to avoid Amara now stepped through the front door, carrying smiles and awkward apologies. Children filled the reading corner every afternoon. Local families attended community events she organized. The town had finally corrected its mistake. Yet for Amara, the attention felt almost as uncomfortable as the isolation once had. She accepted everyone's kindness graciously, but she never seemed interested in celebrating her own vindication. Ethan admired that about her. The more he learned about Amara Bennett, the more extraordinary she became. One snowy evening near the end of January, they sat together inside the bookstore after closing. Outside, fresh snow drifted beneath streetlights, covering Main Street in a quiet blanket of white. Inside, only the soft glow of lamps illuminated the room. The fireplace crackled gently near the reading area. For several minutes, neither spoke. They had reached that rare stage where silence felt comfortable rather than awkward. Ethan sat holding a mug of coffee while watching snow gather outside the window. Across from him, Amara sorted returned books into neat stacks. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "Can I ask you something?" Amara smiled. "You usually do." He laughed softly. Then his expression grew serious. "After everything that happened, why did you stay?" The question lingered between them. Amara looked down at the book in her hands before answering. "I asked myself that many times." She paused. "At first, I stayed because leaving felt like admitting I was ashamed." Ethan listened carefully. "Then what?" A faint smile appeared. "Eventually I stayed because this town was still home." Ethan looked around the bookstore. Every shelf, every chair, every decoration reflected years of care and patience. She had built something beautiful in a place that rarely returned the same kindness. That realization made his admiration deepen even further. For weeks, a truth had been growing quietly inside him. It appeared during their walks through snowy streets, during shared coffee breaks, during conversations that lasted longer than either intended. At first he ignored it. Then he questioned it. Now he could no longer pretend it was anything else. He cared about her. Deeply. More deeply than he expected possible after everything he experienced during the previous year. Yet another thought troubled him. What if Amara only saw him as a friend? What if she had spent so many years protecting herself emotionally that she no longer trusted anyone enough to risk something more? The uncertainty followed him for days. Then one evening, as February approached and winter settled deeper over Vermont, Ethan found himself standing beside Amara in the town square. Fresh snow covered the ground. White lights still decorated several trees despite the holiday season having ended weeks earlier. The town felt peaceful, almost dreamlike. They stood quietly watching children skate across a temporary ice rink near the fountain. Finally, Ethan turned toward her. "There is something I need to tell you." Amara immediately sensed the seriousness in his voice. Her smile faded slightly. "Okay." Ethan took a slow breath. Business negotiations never made him nervous. Public speaking never made him nervous. Yet standing beside Amara felt different. More important, before I met you, I thought loneliness was about being by yourself. He looked directly at her. Then I met someone who made me feel understood. Amara remained still. Snowflakes drifted gently between them. Ethan continued. You became the best part of my days without me even realizing it. For several seconds, neither spoke. The world around them seemed to grow quieter. Finally, Amara lowered her eyes briefly. When she looked back up, there was emotion in her expression he had never seen before. Not surprise, not discomfort, fear. The kind that comes from wanting to believe something while being afraid to trust it. "Ethan," she whispered softly, "you do not know how long it has been since I believed someone could actually stay." Her words carried years of disappointment hidden beneath them. Ethan understood immediately. This was not about romance. Not really. It was about trust. And as they stood together beneath the falling snow, he realized that earning her heart would require the same thing she had spent years giving everyone else. Patience. Winter slowly loosened its grip on Maple Creek as February gave way to March. Snow still covered parts of the countryside, but warmer afternoons began revealing patches of green beneath the white. Storefronts exchanged holiday decorations for early spring flowers. The town itself seemed lighter somehow. Yet the greatest change was not happening in the streets or the seasons. It was happening quietly between two people who had spent years searching for something they did not know they were missing. After their conversation in the town square, Ethan never pressured Amara for answers. He never demanded certainty. He simply remained exactly who he had been from the beginning. Present, reliable, patient. He continued visiting the bookstore. He continued helping with community projects. He continued showing up on ordinary days when there was nothing special to gain. And little by little, something inside Amara began changing. Trust did not arrive all at once. It arrived through consistency, through conversations over coffee, through snowy walks that became spring walks, through countless small moments that quietly proved Ethan meant what he said. One Saturday afternoon, several weeks later, Maple Creek hosted its annual spring festival. Families gathered in the town square beneath bright blue skies. Children played games near the fountain. Musicians performed local folk songs. Food vendors lined the streets with homemade treats and fresh lemonade. The atmosphere felt joyful. Familiar. Home. Ethan stood near a community booth helping organize donated books for local schools. Across the square, Amara laughed while speaking with several families. Watching her felt different now. For years, she had existed on the edges of town life. Now she stood at its center. Not because people suddenly changed who she was, because they finally saw her clearly. As the afternoon continued, Mrs. Caldwell approached Ethan carrying a warm smile. "She looks happy," the older woman said. Ethan followed her gaze toward Amara. "She does." Mrs. Caldwell nodded knowingly. "So do you." Ethan laughed softly. There was no point denying it. For the first time in a very long while, he felt at peace. Later that evening, after the festival ended and the town settled into quiet, Ethan and Amara walked toward the small hill overlooking Maple Creek. The sunset painted the sky with shades of gold, pink, and soft blue. Below them, lights began appearing in windows throughout town. The view stretched for miles across fields, forests, and distant mountains. They sat together on a wooden bench facing the horizon. For several minutes, neither spoke. The silence felt comfortable, familiar. Finally, Amara turned toward him. "Do you know something strange?" Ethan smiled. "Probably not." She laughed softly. "For years, I thought the hardest part of my life was being misunderstood." He listened carefully, but it was not. Ethan waited. Amara looked toward the town below. "The hardest part was believing nobody would ever take the time to understand me." Emotion touched her voice, gentle but unmistakable. Ethan reached for her hand. This time she did not hesitate. Their fingers intertwined naturally, like something that had been waiting a long time to happen. "I am glad you were wrong," he said quietly. Amara smiled. "Me too." The evening breeze moved softly through the trees surrounding them. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang the hour. The sound echoed across the valley beneath the fading sunlight. Looking out over the town, Ethan remembered the lonely Christmas dinner where this journey began. The empty chair, the silent house, the feeling that something important was missing. Back then, he believed he needed to escape loneliness. What he discovered instead was something far greater. Connection, understanding, home, not a place, a person. As the last light of day disappeared beyond the mountains, Amara rested her head gently against his shoulder. Neither spoke. They did not need to, because sometimes the most beautiful endings are not dramatic. They are quiet. Two people who carried loneliness for years finally finding someone willing to stay. And for the first time in a very long time, both of them understood exactly where they belonged.